Hi, and welcome to We Need to Talk with Micah and Shivani. I'm Micah,
I'm Shivani.
and this is episode 2. So, Shivani, I am super excited to be getting into this topic with you. For the audience, we have been brainstorming ideas for quite a while, and we have decided to really tackle the general topic of values. And so I'm thinking we could maybe talk about values that are important to us, values that we admire in others, and also values that we don't like to see in others, and that we simply don't value. Values that we don't value. So I think we can get into it. Maybe Shivani, if you have anything you want to say before we get into it, or you can start the conversation, whatever you'd like to say.
hmm hmm Yeah, like I don't know how deep or like philosophical we want to get with this conversation, but the concept of values is it's a very deep topic. Like even um like philosophically speaking, like there's a lot of schools of thought where there's like relativism and there's I think it's called objectivism. It's been a long time since I've read anything philosophy related. But I think maybe that's what it's
Mhm.
called. I don't know.
Something like that.
But basically like one of them is like, cultural relativism. I think probably it's like also you've probably heard it in sociology or something along those lines, where it's this idea that like, different groups of people and different cultures have different values and different morals. Therefore, there is no like one set of like morals or values that is correct. So in the discussion of values and morals, it's all relative, and there is no way to kind of arrive at any objective truth about it. And obviously objectivism is kind of like the opposite of that, where it's like, no, like in order to arrive at some kind of truth about something, you have to start with the premise that there is an objective truth to be arrived at, that there is some set of like morals and values that is universally correct, and that we can arrive at some kind of truth about it through discussion about it. So, I don't know what end of the spectrum you fall onto. I tend to kind of, change, but generally I tend to go more towards objectivism. I think philosophically that's the one that I kind of have always um I've always kind of leaned more towards that one. But I think just to start off, I'll probably just start off with my personal opinion about it and like my personal experience because, maybe there is no objective truth to it, but at least on some level, like there will be like a personal truth to it. So I'll just maybe just start off by saying like which values I kind of try to uphold the most in my own life. And then at some point we'll probably discuss, values that we don't admire as much. So I guess the, few most important values for me, I would say are hard work, integrity, and I just say kindness, like treating everyone with respect and dignity, no matter who they are. That's a really important one to me. Um, and yeah, I guess I can just let you jump in here and maybe give your own kind of opinion on which values are most important to you.
Yeah. So first, I guess I'll address the first point you raised about, I guess, whether morals fall on some objective scale versus a relative scale. And I think that I would have to say it's my opinion that it's a mix of both, because I think that if you wanted to propose the question, is it okay to kill someone? Okay, well, are you protecting yourself? So if we were to rid of that ambiguity, is it okay to kill someone for no reason? I would say no, it is morally wrong to kill someone for absolutely no reason. And so that is like a rather objective moral. But I think that, um, some things that are rather intuitive can fall on an objective scale. But then if you get into some more personal morality questions, then that exist on like a relative scale. And trying to think of some that might not be controversial. But I guess some people believe that it is a necessity that you have kids. You must have kids, or you did not do what you were put on earth to do. I think that's like a relative thing. You can have kids if you want kids. You shouldn't have kids if you don't want kids. I don't think there's a lot of good that would come out of that. So yeah, I would say I believe that some values are objective in nature and then others are relative. And then in terms of values that I admire, I don't have three off of the top of my head, but I would say that you mentioned hard work, integrity, and kindness. And I do think that those are instrumental values. I think that hard work in particular, hard work and integrity and kindness, maybe I'll just completely steal those three. But anyway, yeah, I think that hard work is really important into developing and cultivating the self, and it gives you self esteem, and that you know that if you put X work into something, you'll get Y results and you have the opportunity to achieve success. Same with integrity. I think it's important not just relationally, and that others can depend on you. And if you commit to something, they know that you will produce what was committed to, but also on an individual level. If you have integrity to yourself, I think you have a rather enduring sense of self and stability in terms of your mental and emotional functioning. And then kindness, of course. I think one thing I hate are rude people. I absolutely hate rude people. And when I'm on driving, sometimes people honk at me for no reasons. People flip me off, and I am not the best driver, but I'm a good driver, okay? I'm not the best, but I'm good enough. Like I do not warrant a middle finger. It makes me so mad. And this is a stupid example, but why are you flipping me off? Okay? Like there's no point in
Yeah.
doing that. Just be nice. Be nice. Why are you putting anger into the world? Be nice. So that's the
Hmm.
stupid example. But it does not take a lot of effort to be kind. And I think that what is the opposite? I guess the opposite of kindness is evil. But I don't know. If you are not nice and if you do something rude, you're putting that energy into the world, and you're, I guess, offloading your anger onto another person, and that person themselves might offload their anger onto another person. So I don't
Hmm.
like rudeness, but yeah. So that was a long tangent for my end, but that is a value. Those are some values that I admire. So I will ask you, what are some values you don't admire, Shivani?
Hmm. Before that, I just want to respond quickly to some of the things you said because I think you said some really important things. For example, the concept of like offloading anger. And that's kind of how I rationalize unkind behavior these days. Like I think when I was first confronted with it, obviously when I was much more naive or just didn't really understand like the source of it, I would just be like, oh, like maybe there's just like good people and then there's like evil people, you know? Like that was kind of my naive understanding of it. Like, okay, like some people are just good and some people are just bad. But I think now the way that I see it is that like there's this quote, I'm trying to remember exactly what it says, but I think it's like happy people make other people happy and like miserable people make other people like miserable basically. Like it's like there's no good or bad people. There's just like joyful and miserable people basically. And basically what it's saying is that like you said the concept of like offloading your anger. Like if you have anger to put out into the world, it means that there's some kind of anger within you. And so really it's just a reflection of you and like people have said this a lot, like it's not a new or revolutionary idea. The idea like oh like how someone behaves towards you is more a reflection of them than like a reflection of you. So you should never take anything that someone does to you too personally because like you shouldn't get hurt by it and be like, oh, like it's because I'm not good enough, like or pretty enough to be treated well or whatever, or smart enough. I'm just like, and like use that to kind of like further reduce your own self-esteem. Like you really shouldn't let it affect you at all because a lot of times, like if you receive anger from someone else, like it's just kind of like revealing something about them to you. Like it's like you're going around the world as someone who like doesn't have that burden and, you know, doesn't have that inside of you. Like you're just going with around on with your life and then you encounter someone who is like mean to you for no reason, but it's like that's the kind of person who you should actually feel sorry for, or like compassionate for, or like pity for, because like they have something inside of them that's making them like a terrible person, basically. And that's how I rationalize it now. And it's always a reflection of what's going on inside of them, I think. Like, and I think it's true. Like, I've observed those kinds of people like for long enough periods of time to know like, oh, they're only behaving that way because they genuinely are like suffering internally for some reason. So it's like I think it helps to understand it, because then you can actually just kind of be compassionate towards them and like send them, send them some compassion, and then move along your own life and do your own thing. So that's one thing I think it's very important to understand. And yeah, like, it's one of the reasons kindness is so important. And it's like it doesn't take much effort to be kind, but I think the reason that a lot of people aren't are like they're just, some of them are just miserable, and it's like sometimes you just have to leave miserable people to be miserable by themselves. So that's kind of the approach that I take, at least.
Can
And
I
then
ask you a question? Sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you,
no, you're totally fine.
but I guess if the reason people are rude is because they're miserable, then how would you suggest that people be less miserable? And do you have experience with being miserable and overcoming and being a
Mhm.
joyful individual?
Yeah. So I'm not saying that I haven't suffered an equal amount in my own life, but I always had this principle that I really valued above a lot of other things, because I always have valued other people. I have always valued other people's feelings. I think when I was growing up, I was always a very sensitive person. I don't know if I classify myself as sensitive now, but when I was growing up, at least, I was very sensitive. So I had like big feelings, I would say, when I was growing up. And because of that, I think because I understood what it meant to have big feelings, and I was so sensitive to like every word that someone said to me. If someone said something critical or mean to me, it would affect me so much. And because I understood that, like I would kind of change my own behavior when I was interacting with other people, where it's like, I'm not going to say those things to someone else because I know how much it affects me. So why would I turn around and say to someone else? And so that was kind of a value that I had, where it was like, um, no matter how much I'm suffering internally or how miserable I am never going to take it out on another person, because it's not their fault. Like it's not their fault that I'm feeling that way, or they didn't do anything to deserve that from me. I might just be having a bad day, but that's my like whatever to deal with. So I always kind of would deal with it on my own internally, like fix things, and then kind of come back when I'm ready to interact with people or whatever. So that was kind of my approach. And as I got older, I would see some people who like didn't do that. I would see people all the time where, because they were, having a bad day, or because they were suffering in some way internally, they would then take it out on someone around them who did nothing to them. Like they're just like this innocent victim who just happened to be like in the vicinity of someone who was having a really bad day. But because I kind of had that principle where it was like, okay, like it doesn't matter how much I'm hurting, I'm not going to ever do that to someone else, because it's just wrong in my opinion. Like that person didn't do anything to you. So I think it's not that I haven't been miserable. It's just I deal with it differently. And then sometimes I'll see people who have gone through like genuine trauma, right? But um instead of like confronting it themselves, or using the help that they have around them, their support system, to kind of face it and process it and deal with it and heal from it, they don't ever heal from it, and instead they just stay that way, and then they continue to be more and more miserable, and then continue to take it out on the people around them who didn't like do anything. Like it's not like they were the ones who caused it or anything. Like they're just there, and they happen to be there around them, whether it's like their family or close friends or whatever, and they just happen to like take it out on them. And like it's not fair in my opinion. Like I think that's very wrong behavior, and it's like behavior that I've always kind of condemned in a way. So yeah, that's like a big value that I have. So it's not like I've never experienced that suffering, but that was something that I really took very seriously from a very, very young age. So yeah, that's if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, you made a lot of good points. And I Okay, I'm always just so surprised when we speak how similar we are. But I'll say I completely relate because what struck me at first is when you said you were super sensitive as a kid, and as you've gotten older, you're simply not as sensitive. You might not describe yourself as sensitive, but I think one of the reasons why I guess prize kindness so much is as a kid I was super sensitive, and I would easily just break down into these meltdowns if people were rude to me or whatever. And I worked hard to grow out of that as I got older because that's like super impractical as an adult. So I would say, thank goodness, I'm not nearly as sensitive anymore. And overall, I can take rudeness. I've enough life experience not get crushed by it. But there was a point I was going to make with that. So I guess essentially just that I can relate to that, and that's the reason why I think kindness is very important to me. And so if I'm feeling particularly down or hopeless with life in a given moment, I will make sure that I don't offload that onto someone else. Of course, it's difficult to mask emotions, and I guess I'm not suggesting that you must completely mask emotions, and but of course, don't just control what you can, and don't put something out. I am rambling, but the other point you made about having friends that lash out on individuals due to their own emotional issues, I can also relate to that. Probably everyone can. But I do remember in college, I had some friends in which our friend group was kind of like the victim of, be at the mercy of their emotions. And if they were having
Mm.
a bad time, then we would have a bad time. And that's not to say that these individuals didn't experience some events that warranted that kind of emotional response from them. But I think that how do you get to a point where you can be the complete, how do you get to the point where you own your emotions versus your emotions own you?
Yeah, like I've definitely had experiences where, like you said, like if one person's having a bad day or a bad night, like everyone else has to also have a bad day or a bad night, you know? And like I personally, like I just don't appreciate like behavior like that because I think it's selfish and inconsiderate, you know? Like if you're going to hijack everyone else's night and experience because of your personal feelings about something, and it's not like it happens once, you know? It's like people who make that a pattern. Like that's when you know it's kind of a problem. Because of course, like maybe you just like get some bad news or you're going through something tragic and like you're just really upset and like you just have a bad night and then maybe like, you know, you kind of get in your friend's way or something like that night and it's okay. You know, that's totally understandable and your friends will be there for you and all of that. But it's like I've seen people who that's like it's like something that happens often and consistently, you know? It's not just like a one-time thing, it's like a behavioral pattern and that's when it's kind of like it's just an annoying personality trait. Like it is a personality trait where it's like and I think part of it also is just like maybe like attention seeking behavior. You know, it's like, oh, nobody's paying attention to me or something, and this is the only way I can get attention. So I'm just gonna like ruin everyone's night just because I want attention and I don't like care if anybody else has fun or not, you know? And it's like what? Like everyone's just trying to have a good time, you know? And it's like you're gonna ruin everyone's night continuously. Like what kind of like behavior or like personality trait is that? You know, I just don't admire it or appreciate it at all. Like it's just I don't know. I don't care for that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I guess kind of with that, it's a bit tricky in that, of course, like you said, an individual can be experiencing a particularly difficult time. And, maybe it's a prolonged period and it's years where they're truly affected by something. And so, in that case, right, there's like empathy to be had with that person. But, also, I think we both have experienced where sometimes there's individuals that it's truly just they expect their friends to be at their mercy, and they expect to be able to dictate a night. They expect to be able to say when we'll do something and when we won't do something. And so when I was younger, it was a bit difficult for me
Mm-hmm.
to make the distinguishment between an individual that was, truly affected by something and having bad
Mm-hmm.
nights versus an
Mm-hmm.
individual that didn't really care about the enjoyment that their friends had, and they simply kind of wanted
Mm-hmm.
to dictate the night, or they had
Mm-hmm.
not good control of their emotions and would, simply
Mm-hmm.
use their emotions as a weapon, if that makes sense. It was
Mm-hmm.
difficult for me to distinguish that. And so I would give empathy towards an individual that was simply being selfish because
Mm-hmm.
I put their emotions and their issues on this pedestal, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, no, and yeah, it's so like it's so nuanced and it's like it's so um like it's like barely there, you know? It's like the level of manipulation that you can't even like recognize it. And it happens a lot. Like I'll see like people who are kind of on the more like emotional side of things, like emotional, like impulsive, like whatever. Um, like take advantage of it and try to manipulate people and like manipulate people's kindness and like they know like how a good decent person would respond, so they take advantage of that, you know, like oh like any good decent person would of course like you know give me empathy or compassion or pity if I just like break down crying, you know, like but I think like what one way for me to recognize it is it a one-time thing or is it a pattern? You know, is if it's a pattern and it's something that they regularly use to get attention in situations where they feel like they're not getting attention, then it's like a personality trait and they're definitely just like playing people. You know, they're like, oh, like or if they're dealing with like pushovers, for example, you know, there's like on the one hand, they can take advantage of people who are just kind people, or they can also take advantage of people that are pushovers and will just go along with what they say, you know, if they're like assertive enough, you know? So if they know like, oh, like I'm around people who aren't going to really push back in any way, like I can just do whatever I want and dictate how the night goes. So it's like a level of manipulation that's like barely there that you can barely even see it. But it is still manipulation and it's like manipulating people using like emotions basically. And you have to be somewhat emotionally intelligent to do that, you know? Like you can't do it, I think, if you aren't emotionally intelligent, but it's like and the person themselves might not even realize like they're doing it for that reason, you know? Like it's kind of like an unconscious underlying motivation and it's like I feel like I can maybe kind of like um sniff it out or like see it for what it is, but that person themselves might not know that they're manipulating other people in that way. Like that's just the way
Mm-hmm.
that they know how to get a response from people. So it's like their go-to, and maybe it's even unconscious for them. You know, it might not even be conscious for them, and they might not be doing it knowingly, like oh, like with like bad intentions to like ruin people's night or anything. It's just like that's what they resort to when they feel like they don't have anything else to resort to. And then the other point you brought up earlier, where it was like that concept of like, you know, control over your emotions and like whether you have control over your emotions or your emotions control you, right? I think you brought up a question similar to that in some way. And yeah, like I definitely have encountered like impulsive people, I would say. And the way that I kind of characterize it, at least in my head, is like it's not that I don't have as powerful of emotions as they do, you know, because I think sometimes like that can be mistaken for like emotional sensitivity or emotional intelligence, where it's like, no, like I have really experienced that as well, like strong, intense feelings. But for me, there's like a gap between like my emotions and like the action that follows. You know, I would say like impulsive people, like they feel that intense emotion, but they lack that kind of like control over what happens afterwards. So it's like there is no kind of gap. Like I think for a conscious person who takes a lot of responsibility for their life and their behavior, like they have those feelings, but then they think, okay, how should I behave in response to this, you know? And that's another thing I think we can kind of segue into like another, it's kind of like a separate topic, but
Mm-hmm.
also like related, where it's like how much responsibility are you taking for your actions, you know? And I was kind of referring to this earlier, where I was saying like, even if you are struggling, even if you are suffering, even if you are miserable, whatever, you know, like you can't use that to justify bad behavior towards other people who didn't do anything to you, you know? Like, and that's kind of what it's about, you know? It's like what justifies your behavior. And for me, it's like I have to view myself at all times as someone who has complete control over my actions because that means that I take complete responsibility for everything that I do and I'm completely accountable for everything that I do. Whereas some people kind of take like an easier way out where it's like, well, I don't have that kind of control. You know, I'm an impulsive person and I just don't have that kind of control. So you can't really blame me, you know? And it's a way of kind of avoiding the blame and taking accountability for things that you did when maybe you're angry or whatever, you know? And I think in order to become someone who, at least like the kind of person that I want to be, at least, like I'm not saying everyone
Mm-hmm.
else has to be this way too, but I see a lot of people justifying bad behavior by just not taking accountability for it, by like, oh, I was drunk, I was angry, I was blah blah blah, you know? And like to me, they're like those are just excuses, and those are excuses that I personally would never make because you know, then in some ways you're kind of getting into the habit of kind of like you said, eight your own like I don't think it's in this episode, but at some point we were talking and you said like your own agency is very important to you, right? And I think a lot of people unknowingly kind of give that up, you know, and that's one of the ways they give it up, you know, by saying I just don't have control over it. And that's not true. Like you just haven't tried hard enough to gain control over it in some ways. At least, like, that's my opinion on it. Maybe, you know, that can be debated. But maybe there are like people who genuinely just feel like they lack complete control over their actions or whatever. But sometimes if you're dealing with someone who generally is kind of just, you know, a normal person, I feel like that's an okay thing to expect from them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if makes any sense. But that's what kind of what I wanted to say. Just like, you know, you have your intense feelings, but then, you know, there's that gap between like what you feel and what you do. And it's like if you kind of recognize that and you kind of realize like, okay, I'm the person doing all of those things. Like the conscious part of myself is the one that's doing all of those things. And maybe it's just a matter of like increasing your level of consciousness. I'm not sure. But yeah, I would say that's probably one way to gain a little bit more control of your emotions. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
try to control my emotions. You know, I let myself feel everything that I'm feeling. And just because I don't express it, like it doesn't mean that I don't feel things as strongly as the person who throws a tantrum. You know, I think that can also kind of be like a misinterpretation maybe.
Yeah.
Like I see people make that mistake a lot too, where it's like they think that I don't have feelings or I don't have emotions because I don't always express them. Or they think like, oh, like I'm not as emotionally sensitive or as emotionally intelligent as the person who just throws a tantrum for everything that they feel. And that's not true, you know? It's like I just don't do like the second thing where it's like I don't throw the tantrum and I'm not going to tell every person I meet how I'm feeling that day, you know? That's just something that I
Mm-hmm.
prefer to keep private, but it doesn't mean that I don't have emotions or feelings or am not as emotionally intelligent as that person. Like it's yeah, it's just not true. But like, you know, I'll see people like think that where it's like, oh, like that's the person who like has such strong emotions and is like so emotionally intelligent. It's like no, like they're just the person who has no control over their behavior. Like that's literally the only difference, you know?
Yeah, you made a few good points that I wanted to bring up. And tying that in with your emotional like responses, I definitely experience strong emotion still. And I know we were talking a little while ago how we feel like our hormones kind of influence our emotion. And I was saying how sometimes I will feel quite sad or depressed, depending on, you know, maybe my cycle, and how I can recognize that it's my hormones that are definitely influencing my emotions, but I'm definitely still experiencing these emotions at the given time. I don't just dismiss them due to hormones. I don't know, I typically tend to think that they are just heightening existing emotion. They're not bringing anything new or irrational to light. And I just say that because, say, a day where I am feeling extra emotional and I know the reason why I am feeling extra emotional. Well, I still want to allow myself to experience this emotion, but I would experience it, try to experience it when I'm alone and say not at work, where that would be inappropriate of me to exhibit such an emotion. And obviously, when you experience strong emotion, like the stronger the emotion, the more difficult it is to control it. So I don't know if there's much of a point to be made with that observation, but I think that for me, it's been a long journey to develop into an individual that has a relative good control over her emotions. Because, like I said, when I was a kid, I was super sensitive and I would have these uncontrollable breakdowns, and I would try not to, but I simply could not. Like, the emotion I would experience most was just sadness, like very in deep sadness and anger, but not really like typical anger. Probably a little less than typical anger. I didn't tend to get very angry, but sadness was the big thing. And yeah, it's been a journey to, I guess, take ownership of that. And I feel really good that I can take ownership of that. And I guess it's not even necessarily just that I have complete control, but learning how to become less sensitive, or how, I don't know if less sensitive is the word, but how to make things affect me less and to take things less personally. And I know that you mentioned you're a big fan of meditation. I don't know if you said it within the podcast or within a side conversation. And yeah, that was something I definitely used to do when I was younger. And it really helped calm my mind and calm myself. And I think it's a very useful tool.
Yeah, I think that actually might begin to answer the question that I was going to ask you. Because I think meditation has helped me a lot too. And like, as I kind of like educate myself more from like, certain spiritual kind of teachings and stuff, um, I also kind of have this belief where I believe like attachment is the source of all misery, and like detachment is the source of all joy. And like when I say that I've become less sensitive, I think it's not that I can't be as sensitive as I used to be. I think I'm just much better at like detaching from things that aren't helpful for me. I don't ruminate as much, and I'm not just like, going over and over again in my head about certain things that really just will make me upset or depressed if I think about it too much. And I think meditation has been kind of one thing that has really been helping me with that, particularly like just detaching from the world around you and kind of like going into your own mental space or wherever you really want to go, and then just kind of like, not thinking about anything for a little bit and having that practice of just detaching regularly is helpful for me. So I think I could be as sensitive as I used to be, because obviously like I'm the same person, and it's not like I've changed in any way, but I think I've been getting better at detaching. And I think it's actually gotten to the point where it's kind of like, too much. Like it kind of scares me a little bit, and I kind of like want to be more attached to things, but because I now have the ability to kind of detach from everything, and it's like I don't know, maybe a little bit of that is good, and maybe I'm going too far with it. I don't really know. But the question I was going to ask you was, what were there any things specific that you remember that you can point to that have kind of helped you on your own journey from being like very sensitive as a kid and like breaking down, and to who you are now, where you kind of have thicker skin, and like things that other people say don't get to you as much, and you can deal with that without really feeling too affected by it. Are there any things
Mm-hmm.
that you can point to or remember specifically that kind of have helped you get to this point?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. And one thing I mentioned first are the values that we first discussed in the beginning. And I think that dedicating myself to school and then to hobbies and then to challenging myself gave me a confidence within myself. And so when people say certain, I can brush things off because I know that simply because someone says something to me, it doesn't mean it's true. And so that works very well for, say, negative criticism. Not to say that I simply dismiss it, but
Hmm.
I'll think about it, I'll reflect, and I'll decide whether or not I want to accept it. And that also goes to positive things. I would say I like compliments, but I'm not, too affected by them because I think that I have a rather a decent understanding of myself and my capabilities. Not, maybe not 100%, but I think I understand myself. But for me, I think one of the biggest, I guess, values I could have mentioned, I don't know if it's necessarily a value, but a way in viewing myself is that I don't know. I know that I have friends, I guess in family, or I have people that care about me and value me, but overall I don't know, I just don't matter. I am like an insignificant person. I go throughout life, I live my life, but overall, right? If I were to die tomorrow, okay, people would be sad. Some people would be really sad, right? It would, but overall, the world would go on. And so that was one thing that really helped me. Like I don't take a lot of things personally because I will admit I'm kind of awkward. And when I was a kid, okay, me being awkward made me even more awkward because I'm just like, shoot, Micah, why are you so awkward? Like, stop doing this. And anyway, well, I won't roast myself, so I'll stop there. But now, like, I'm awkward and I recognize that people might think I'm weird, but okay, I don't really care. It's like, if I'm weird, I'm weird. It literally doesn't
Hmm.
matter. And so I think that's been
Hmm.
easy. Moving to a new city directly after college and then moving to another city. And then overall, I think, like I said, I definitely feel quite isolated oftentimes. But for me, I experience that emotion and I validate that emotion. But also, life moves on. And the good thing is that I can try something new. I can change the way I feel. There are plenty of other ways that I can live life. But overall, I'm kind of straying from your initial question of how I guess that I develop a thicker skin. But I think it's a combination of those values that were mentioned and also not taking myself very seriously and just, enjoying. I don't like to be mad. I just like to be okay. I mean, I would prefer to feel joyful. Which, on a side note, sometimes I go in these coffee detoxes. I don't drink coffee
Hmm.
for like 4 days, and then I'll drink
Hmm.
coffee, and it makes me feel amazing.
Hmm.
So I don't know why I
Hmm.
said that.
I actually watched a YouTube video recently that was kind of like talking about that, and I thought it was actually a really useful thing that they were saying. Like basically, they were saying like if you continually use things like coffee or blah blah blah, like whatever substances you're in the habit of using, like if you don't use them for their purpose, right? Like, and you just use them like regularly, like they're no longer kind of like a useful tool in your toolbox. Like they don't have that effect anymore, right? Because you build up tolerance to them. So if you only use those things like when you need to produce like whatever effect you're after, like okay, I just need to feel like a little more energetic or a little more awake or whatever, then I'm gonna drink coffee. Then when you drink it, because you haven't built up a tolerance to it, like you're going to have that effect. But if you don't use it that way and you just drink it every single day, like it ceases to actually have the effect that you want it to have, you know? So it's no longer like a useful part of your day, you know? So that I thought that was like just like a really like interesting thing that I heard someone say recently. I can't remember who, but I wish I could so I could give credit. But that's actually a really interesting thing. And yeah, and then on the point of like not taking yourself so seriously, first of all, I would be very upset if that happened, by the way. Like if you cease to exist tomorrow or something. Like I would be one of those people who'd be genuinely very upset. Like I think there's like a video by like Jordan Peterson that I've sent you before. Maybe I've sent it to you or someone else, but I send it to literally everybody. And it's like kind of about that idea of like being insignificant, you know? And what he says is that like basically it kind of like challenges that a little bit because I think like our general kind of like scientific materialist view kind of, like because we've like seen Earth from space and it's like a pale blue dot and we're like in the scheme of everything like we're just so insignificant and that's the reason to just not take anything seriously and believe like life is pointless and meaningless and all of those things. Um and he has like a very different perspective on it, which I kind of like gravitate towards more just because I feel like I function better when I have that perspective of like, oh, like what I do matters, like what I do is important and it just makes my life more meaningful. I think that's like one of the things like a lot of people struggle with is just like finding existence kind of meaningless. And so what he says is that basically like every single person is like a node in a network, right? And I think he says like you're like one person removed from like a million people because you're going to encounter at least like 1,000 people over the course of your life. And those 1,000 people know at least another 1,000 people, right? So it's like like what you do could have really, really powerful ripple effects. Like if you do something, that's kind of like noteworthy. So I think about that a lot, just like the fact that you are kind of a node in a network and you have a lot more influence than you think you have. So like there should be some kind of like significance to what you're doing, or like there shouldn't. Like you could like you said, like it's something that helps you. Like not taking yourself so seriously is an idea that helps you. Kind of like deal with maybe like emotional ups and downs and stuff. And if that's an idea that helps you and that's like the perspective that you feel like is more helpful to you, then maybe making things important or significant and maybe that's too overwhelming, then I feel like that's what you should do for yourself. I think just for myself personally, like it helps me because I just feel like I'm like, what I do is significant
Mm.
and then I kind of just have like a little bit more of a drive just to like do things with myself. Um, but a lot of the other things that you said were also, I found like really insightful. Like for example, when you said like positive compliments, for example, don't affect you too much. Like this is some like a realization that I've only arrived at recently, where I actually didn't like notice this about myself. I thought like, there would be certain events that happen, like, oh, like I received like a text message from a guy that I have a crush on or something along those lines, right? Like you just like get that rush of like dopamine or like someone gives me attention and I enjoy it and it just makes me really, really happy in that moment, right? But there's this idea that like, what kind of like builds you up also kind of like brings you down. Maybe it's like the idea like what goes up must come down, So in relation to like emotions, like in a way you're kind of like um instead of you having control over your emotions, now like external situation, external circumstances have that control over your emotions, basically. So if what you receive from the outside world is the reason that you feel happiness, right? Like in the absence of that, you're going to feel like a lack and a void and unhappiness, right? And I didn't realize that like until I didn't have it, like there was like a point where it's like I didn't have it anymore. And then I was like, oh, like why am I so like unhappy? Like why am I getting so depressed? And it was because like my happiness wasn't coming from myself, like it was coming from some external source that I wasn't even aware of. Like in the moment, it would make me really, really happy, but then, once it was gone, it would make me really, really unhappy. And so if you want to just be like an emotionally happy person consistently, I think your happiness kind of has to depend on yourself and not on like external sources. And another point about that is that like external validation is temporary, and people don't realize that like people these days have such short attention spans. Like you could do something, like you could post something like really pretty or really whatever attractive on Instagram or something, right? But you're like one post among like the thousands and thousands of posts that people see like in a day, right? And like they might give you a little bit of attention, right? And you might feel happy about like the attention that you're getting and like feel really validated. And if like external validation is like your source of happiness, like you'll get what you're after for a short amount of time, but it's temporary and then that's going to go away and they're going to get bored of you and then, or just forget about you because it's like they see a million girls like that. And then you have to do something else to like get people's attention again and like receive that validation again. So it's like it's just like a never ending cycle. And so it's like if that's like what your happiness is dependent on, like like you're always going to be chasing after it. And it's not like you have that inner, like inner sense of just like peace and contentment that just comes from you. And I think that relates a lot to what you were saying about how like your values kind of provide that foundation for your sense of self, basically. And I think like what you're talking about is like you have a very strong self-concept where it's like you know these things about yourself, and they're things that make you proud of yourself. Like if you look at yourself, like you know that like you know who you are, right? So you know that you're hardworking, you know that you have integrity, and those are things that you've proved to yourself because that's what's important to you. Like it's not something that you did necessarily for other people. And I think that's really, how you kind of build that like sense of self. And it kind of does act as kind of like a barricade against the words of other people. Because like you said, like you can decide like what opinions to accept and what opinions not to accept. And that doesn't mean that you don't consider them, because it's like it doesn't mean like you're some like stubborn person who like, just has their view and doesn't accept or consider anybody else's opinions. Because like you said, like you'll still consider them, which is actually really good. Like I feel like I need to do that a little bit more than, you probably do. Because I've been called stubborn by my family before. But anyway, I'm digressing. But um, like you said, like you can just be like, okay, like that's just not true. Like I know myself and I have a really deep understanding of myself. So if someone tells me something that's not true, it's not going to affect me because you have that kind of like inner knowledge and like confidence that like it's not true. And like you have people in your life who truly know you and truly care about you and like uplift you and support you. And then there's other people who don't care about you, and you kind of understand like what they say doesn't matter, like their opinion of you doesn't matter because first of all, they don't know you and they don't care about you. So it's like, why would you take anything that they say seriously? And that's like a more like I think if more people understood that, it'd actually help a lot of people, because I think for a lot of people, like the words of other people hold so much power over them, and it's like it can really just like ruin their day. Like what other people say about them, like causes them to kind of like sway kind of like, a tree in a wind kind of, like because they have so much power over them and over their emotional state and stability that um they don't have that like ability to be like, no, like I know myself. I know that's not true. And because of that, like I feel like they just suffer a lot because they don't have that. So I mean, it's really great that you do.
There
And
is,
yeah.
however,
Hmm. Yeah, go
or
ahead.
there's just one caveat I guess I'd like to make with my statement, because
Okay.
I say this, but I, one, am not heavy on social media. And so I think that perhaps if I were and I got a lot of negative attention and a lot of negative criticism, I would assume that would affect me quite negatively. But because that's so, I mean, maybe with this podcast, right? If some large, I guess, quantity of individuals were to give us hate comments, I think I would be quite affected. So I think it's because I make an aim to not be in a position where I get a lot of attention, whether it be positive or negative. Instead, I aim to do things that I'm able to do, for the most part by myself or just with
Hmm.
individuals I like. And so I'm not wary of that criticism. So I guess if, I don't know, we end up gaining some kind of popularity. Hopefully, it would just be in some niche where people in general like us. I don't think we're going to say anything too controversial. So, but I think that was just why, like, asterisk, I wanted to say.
Hmm. Yeah, like the way that I view it is like I view it kind of like a muscle, you know? Like, for example, like I don't think anybody's necessarily, maybe some people are. I just wasn't one of those people um who was like born like, a, a good speaker. I don't think most people are just born and know how to speak well. I think it's something that you practice and you get better at the more that you do it. Um, and in the same way, like because we like both of us are relatively inactive on social media and inactive kind of just publicly. Like we don't really have a public life, I would say. Like we both have probably relatively private lives. That isn't something that we've necessarily ever had to deal with before. But I think over time you probably get better at it. Like the more that you are kind of in the public eye and the more hate comments that you do receive, it's like it probably doesn't bother you as much over time. Like it's like kind of like a muscle. So at least that's what I'm expecting. Like maybe it will affect us more than I think it will, but I think it's like you just kind of have to put yourself out there anyway. Because I think with that, it's like I don't think we'll say anything that's like overtly offensive because I think both of us think before we speak and we are considerate of people in general. And yeah, we're thoughtful people. So I don't think we're ever going to say anything that's like overtly just, and we're not mean. So I don't think like we'll have any issues on that front, you know? But we do have opinions, and I think like if you take a stance on basically anything these days, like there's going to be people that take an opposing stance to whatever you're saying. So it's like you can't really avoid it to an extent. Like I feel like if you have kind of any strong position on anything, like you're gonna get some hate from the opposing side. And that's just kind of comes with the territory. And I think that's okay. Like I think we'll be able to deal with it. We'll just have to see, I guess. But, I think we'll probably get better at it as time goes on, hopefully. But thankfully we haven't, I mean, we're not like, we haven't received any comments yet. So, um, I think it'll be interesting. So we also haven't received any negative comments yet. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't know if I was thinking about it earlier today, but I think I was thinking about it. I was like curious, like, how would I respond to like the first negative comment that I receive? Like, I didn't know like how bad it would be or what my reaction would be. Like, most of my brain was saying like, oh, I probably wouldn't care that much. Like, I would probably just brush it off, but it hasn't actually happened yet. Like, I haven't actually received a negative comment yet. So I guess we'll find out. But hopefully, yeah, we'll get big enough to actually receive negative comments. But it'll just
Yeah.
be something to see. Yeah.
Like I think it would definitely depend on the comment. But I definitely don't think at all that I'm immune to criticism. It's just, for the most part, I don't know. I think when it's criticism you receive in person or by someone you vaguely know, you have some sort of indication as to why they might think that. And so it's easy to judge, okay, do I think it's valid or not? But I think it's just a random person. It hits different, as they say. I don't know. I would have to
Mhm.
see. I would honestly have to
Mhm.
see. Because I think that kind of goes back to when I was saying when I'm driving on the road, if I get a middle finger, like things like that bothered me more when it's just such an abrupt
Mhm.
display of disrespect or rudeness.
Mhm.
And, okay, a while ago I did get flipped off and it generally did make me mad. So I guess that's not necessarily, well, it's criticism on my driving. I don't know why. That specifically really does make me mad. But so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But I think we'll be fine. I'm not too worried, but we'll see. I did,
Yeah, it
however,
remains to be seen. Mhm.
unless I don't, I think I interrupted you. I don't know if you wanted to finish a thought
I
or if
don't
I can
think I
ask a
had, yeah, I don't think I had much more to say. Yeah, I think I was just talking about like having that strong self-concept is important and like the way that you view yourself is more important than the way that someone
question.
else views you. And as long as you kind of continue to kind of adhere to that and realize like, okay, how do I see myself and place more emphasis and value on that than how other people see you, I think generally you'll be okay. Um, but it's not easy to do. It's easy to forget how to do that.
Okay, so there is one thing I wanted to say about the topic of external versus internal validation. And I feel like this is probably a very common thing, but it's a lot easier to get internal validation as you get older, I think. Because when you say you're in middle school, well, definitely the middle school environment is completely different than the adult environment. And if it's not, I feel really bad for like adults that have to live in that kind of environment. But you're definitely experiencing social pressures, and you are at the whim of the social pressures. Just now, I'm reflecting back to sometime in middle school when I remember these girls were trying to make me cry. I don't know
Hmm.
why, okay? But then I started crying and they were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry." Blah 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 blah. That just popped into my head, and that's just like a weird thing. Like I don't know the point. Like it was just a pointless thing. But I just say that because as a rational adult, if someone were to try to make me cry just for the sake of crying, it wouldn't have it wouldn't work, most likely. It just wouldn't work. And so I just say that because as you get older, you work hard towards something. You pick up some hobbies. You dedicate yourself to other things. You form these good relationships and you develop yourself apart from your peers. And so I think that, I guess, when you initially asked me how I became less affected by the criticism of others, I think in part it's age, but I think that was an active journey. I think it's in part inactive and active. A large part of it is being actively in pursuit of such things that I mentioned. But
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. First of all, that's really terrible thing to do to somebody, you know. Thankfully, I
I mean, when
avoided
I
bullying
look
for the
back, I
most
just
part.
laugh. I'm like, that was actually such a
Yeah.
stupid thing. I don't even get that.
It
I
is
think it was
stupid, but like when
genuinely
you're
just
young, yeah, like I remember being young and like I was very naive when I was young, like I was very like innocent and naive and like I said, like I would be affected pretty easily by like anything that would happen to me. So I wouldn't know better when I was young. um if someone was like trying to do that to me, like I would probably just go home and cry. Actually, that's like there was only one time in high school where I genuinely felt kind of like bullied and I just broke down crying like in the middle of class and had to leave like school that day, and then I went home and cried more for the rest of the day. Like I was so distraught by it. I was just like it was horrible. But and then the point on confidence, like I think we should talk about it more, like in the future. But I think a good question to ask is like where your confidence comes from, right? Like for you, a lot of it like comes from yourself, and like it's like a very like it's a process that kind of takes place in like your inner world. And I think for a lot of people that isn't the case. And I think you can kind of use that same model for a lot of different things, not just confidence, happiness, um, peace, like all of these different things, like emotional stability, where if it's too reliant on the outside world or your um environment or your external situation, like that's not a strong foundation to base something that like very important on. So I think one thing we should probably talk about at some point is how to kind of become a more like independent and self-reliant person who gets better at like validating themselves, like creating their own happiness, creating their own peace, basically, and just, being a little bit more like self-sufficient in that aspect. Because if you rely too much on your outside world to do that for you, it's not necessarily guaranteed. Some people get really lucky, like you said, and things just work out for them. Um, for most people, at least in my personal experience, that isn't the case. Like you're always going to have things that, can kind of shift you or tilt you one way or another. And I think if you kind of build a stronger foundation for those really important things, like you will generally lead kind of like a happier, more fulfilling life, in my opinion. So we should definitely talk about that at some point, like how somebody actually goes about doing something like that, because um, I think it's an important thing. It's an important skill to kind of cultivate, and I don't think anyone's born with it. It's like a skill that I've had to kind of practice over time, and I
Mhm.
think now I'm in a place where I am a lot more independent in those ways, and I'm not dependent on other people to, for my happiness or my self-worth or whatever, but there are some people who maybe aren't there yet or don't know how to get there. So I think that's something we should talk about at some point for sure, maybe in a future episode or something. If people want to hear it, I think it'd be great to get some feedback from viewers as well, like what they want to hear about or what they don't want to hear about. So if that's something that I think maybe some people would be interested in us talking about, we can definitely do an episode on it in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great, Shivani. I think that would be a really good topic for a future episode. And overall, this episode, I think we've had a really great discussion. And I'm happy that we finally decided on a topic of values because for the audience, it was a struggle trying to like definitively decide what we wanted to talk about. But despite that, I think we had a really good conversation. And it's really been great speaking with you, Shivani. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
No, same here. I've enjoyed it a lot, and I think we went over a lot of really important things that maybe, we'll continue to talk about probably because, I don't think we'll probably, I mean, these are all really important things, so I'm sure they'll come up more like, often in the future too. So I think, there were a lot of good things brought up in this conversation, and I, appreciate like, some of the really insightful things that you've said as well today. So I definitely enjoyed the conversation a lot, as always. And yeah, and to the viewers, thank you for watching if you've watched this far.
Yeah, everyone, thank you again for watching this far. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and we'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. So please feel free to say anything, and I guess we'll see you next week.